The keep of Hearthome had stood for 3 centuries. Its walls were thick with ivy, its banners sun-faded but proud, its people hardened by winters and softened by song. Lady Illyra had grown up within those stone walls, learning to read by candlelight, to ride along the meadow's edge, and to whisper prayers into the old chapel's hollow echo. But on the night the orcs came, none of that mattered. The wind was sharp with the scent of smoke long before the alarm bell tolled. Illyra had woken with a start, her chamber lit by the red pulse of flames rising beyond the walls. Shouts echoed from the courtyard below, calling for arms. Mothers gathering children. The iron squeal of gates being forced. "Illyra," cried her handmaiden, a girl only a few years younger, hair tumbling in braids. "The north wall is breached. We must run." But the lady did not run. She stepped to the window and saw shadows pouring through the outer yard. Not men, but hulking figures with jutting jaws and crude blades that glimmered in firelight. Orcs, they moved with the force of a storm, battering aside guards who tried to stand against them. The keep's horn blew once, then broke off in a strangled cry. Illyra's heart pounded. Yet some part of her mind, sharpened by long years of duty as her father's daughter, refused to falter. "We must find the others," she said. "The women, the children. Gather them." The handmaiden hesitated. "The orcs are in the yard. Then we go beneath." The stone passages of Hearthome were as familiar to Illyra as her own breath. She led them through a narrow stair into the underhole, where storerooms and granaries lay. There they found a dozen women already gathered, cooks with flour still on their arms, washerwomen clutching damp linens, 2 mothers cradling infants swaddled in haste. Their eyes widened at the sight of their lady, hair loose over her night shift, face pale but steady. "My lady," whispered one, "what do we do?" "We live," Illyra answered. "That is all we must do tonight." But the words were scarcely spoken before the pounding began above boots on stone. Guttural voices shouting in a tongue none of them knew. The sound of splintering doors. The orcs were inside the keep. The women huddled close, clutching each other's hands. Someone began to pray. Another began to weep. Illyra stood straighter. Fear gnawed at her ribs, but she swallowed it down. She would not let them see her tremble. She was daughter of Lord Hearthome, keeper of this house, and even if all else was lost, her women would not face this night alone. The orcs came like thunder down the stairs. The door was torn from its hinges, light flaring behind them. In stormed 3 of the creatures, taller than any man, with green-gray skin and tusks catching the torchlight. Their armor was mismatched, their weapons scarred from old wars, but their presence filled the chamber like iron fills a wound. One bellowed, a voice like a drum. He seized a barrel and hurled it aside, then pointed at the women. Another strode forward, rough hands grabbing the nearest servant. Screams rose, children cried out. Illyra moved without thinking. She stepped between, raising her arm. "I am lady of this house," she declared. "Take me, not them." The orcs froze for a heartbeat. Their small eyes flickered over her silk shift, silver chain at her throat, the bearing of command. The largest snarled and barked something in his tongue. Hands like iron seized her arms. Illyra felt herself dragged, her feet skidding over stone. The women cried out her name, some reaching toward her, others holding back their own children. "Be strong," Illyra gasped. Be strong, all of you. Do not let them break you. Her words hung in the air long after she was gone. The courtyard was a nightmare of fire and steel. Corpses lay where they had fallen, men-at-arms cut down, torches flaring in pools of blood. Orcs moved in packs, dragging the living into knots, binding hands with coarse rope. Illyra was thrown to her knees before a figure larger still, their leader, marked with bone trophies and a scar across his throat. He studied her with an expression that was not quite amusement. Then he laughed, a low, rattling sound, and spoke a command. The women of Hearthome were rounded up, driven from their keep like cattle. The night swallowed their cries as smoke and flame rose to the heavens. Illyra, bruised and bound, lifted her chin to the sky. She did not weep, she did not beg. In that moment, beneath the ash of her home, she vowed that this story would not belong to the orcs. It would belong to the women. To her, the night after the fall of Hearthome was long and cruel. The air smelled of smoke and blood. The cries of the dying still lingered in the ears of the survivors, bound at wrist and ankle. The women of the keep were driven out beneath the broken gate, herded like livestock into the wilderness beyond. The moon shone pale over the company of captives, its cold light gleaming on chains that linked them neck to neck. The orcs trudged alongside with heavy strides, their guttural language a low thunder in the air. Each clang of iron, each barked command, seemed to hammer despair deeper into the women's hearts. Illyra walked at the front, a rope cutting into her wrists. Her gown, once white, was stained with soot and ash. Her hair, unbound, tangled in the wind. She did not weep, though her throat ached with unshed tears. If she faltered, she feared the others would collapse with her. And so she walked upright, shoulders straight, as if she led them still, though they were captives now, not citizens of a proud house. Behind her came the handmaiden, steps stumbling. My lady, she whispered, voice raw. Where will they take us? Illyra shook her head. It matters not. We endure, that is all. The handmaiden shivered, but found strength in the words. Hours stretched into eternity. The forest swallowed them, trees rising like black pillars. Branches clawed at their hair, roots threatened to trip them. Torches flared, throwing shadows that leaped like demons on the bark. Some women muttered prayers, others hummed half-forgotten lullabies. One mother, carrying her child in trembling arms, faltered. The infant whimpered, hungry and cold. An orc snarled and swung his club threateningly. The mother cowered. But before the blow could fall, another woman, a cook of the keep, broad-shouldered and scarred from years at the hearth, stepped forward, shielding the mother with her body. Strike me, she hissed. If you must strike someone. The orc grunted, shoved her aside, and let them march on. Illyra saw this, and her heart burned with pride. Even in chains, her women still stood for one another. Later, when the moon had sunk and the sky paled with the first gray hints of dawn, the chain slowed. The orcs rested, tossing aside packs and weapons. The women were driven into a hollow, where roots made cruel seats and stones bruised their knees. There, in the dim silence, whispers stirred. We will die here, said one. Hush, murmured another. Do not speak it. Then, from the middle of the circle, a voice rose thin at first, then steady. The handmaiden was singing. It was an old song, a hearth song from the keep's winter feasts. one of warmth and bread and laughter. Her voice trembled, cracked, but she did not stop. Soon the others joined, hesitant at first, then stronger, until the hollow echoed with women's voices twining in harmony. The orcs turned their heads, muttering, but they did not silence them. Perhaps they thought it a harmless thing, but Alira knew better. She felt the strength return to her chest with every note. They were not silent cattle. They were women, daughters of Hearthome, and as long as they sang, they were not broken. When the song faded, the women sat in silence, the kind of silence that holds meaning. Their chains were heavy, their wrists raw, their futures uncertain, but something had shifted. They had claimed a piece of themselves back. Alira leaned close to them, her voice a whisper that carried. Remember this, the orcs may bind our hands, but they cannot bind our hearts. We will endure together. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, eyes rimmed with red, but shining now with something fiercer than grief. Silent defiance. And so they marched again into the deep wilds, torches fading behind them. Each woman bore the weight not only of her own chains, but of her sisters. And though the night was cruel and the orcs merciless, their steps no longer rang with despair alone. For with every whisper, every song, every shared glance in the dark, the women began to weave something stronger than iron, a bond that the orcs could not see, but which would one day save them. The forest opened onto a clearing ringed by stones, where a dozen fires burned. The orcs' camp sprawled outward like a beast's den, full of smoke and snarling voices. Here the women were driven, herded toward the edge of the firelight, where shadows clung. The stink of roasting meat, sweat, and blood thickened the air. Orcs feasted loudly, slamming mugs and tearing flesh with their tusks. They did not speak with words, the women knew, but their laughter was enough harsh, mocking, meant to remind the captives of their helplessness. Alira sat straight-backed, wrists bound before her, eyes fixed on the flames. She forced herself not to cower. Around her, the women gathered in small clusters, whispering when the guards' backs were turned. Some trembled, some stared numbly, others rocked children against their chests to lull them into fragile sleep. The lady's presence was their anchor, but even she could feel despair gnawing at the edges of her heart. When the orc laughter lulled, another sound rose, softer, fragile. It came from the eldest among them, a crone whose hair was silver as frost. Her name was Iseldra, and she had been a midwife, keeper of birth and burial in heart. She sat cross-legged, her eyes glinting with a strange, fierce light. "Listen," she murmured. The women turned toward her. In the days before stone keeps and iron gates, there were women like us, women taken, women bound. Yet they endured. They lived in the forests, in caves, in the wild places. They became wolves, hawks, shadows. Their names were forgotten by men, but not by the earth. Her voice rasped, yet it carried. Even the orc guards, half dozing, glanced over uneasily at her tone. "The world has always thought women break," Iseldra said. "But the truth is this, we bend and then we rise. Just as water carves stone, so too do we carve a way forward." The younger women leaned close, their faces lit by firelight. One girl, no more than 15, whispered, "But we have no weapons." Iseldra smiled faintly. "A weapon is anything that turns the tide. A song, a glance, a hand offered to lift another when she falls. Together, those are sharper than steel. Elira met her gaze, and in that moment she understood. The old woman was not merely telling a story, she was binding them, weaving hope out of the ash and fear. The handmaiden, the same who had sung the night before, spoke up. Her voice shook, but it did not falter. "Then we are not broken," she said. "We are waiting." A murmur rippled through the women. They shifted, sitting straighter, their eyes meeting across the circle. Fear still lived in them, yes, but alongside it came a quiet fire. Across the camp, orcs noticed. Their laughter dulled. Some muttered among themselves, wary without knowing why. Later that night, when the orcs grew drunk on their feasting and sleep pulled them down like stones, the women remained awake. They huddled together in their corner of the camp, whispering. They shared memories of the keep, the warmth of the kitchens, the smell of spiced bread, the sound of bells at festival. Each memory was a spark, and together they built a flame that could not be seen but could be felt. They began to call each other sisters, no longer lady and servant, noble and peasant, just women, just survivors. One mother pressed her forehead to Elira's shoulder and whispered, "If I do not live to see tomorrow, tell my daughter I stood with you. Tell her I was not afraid. You will live." But she held the woman's hand as if she could pass her strength through skin and bone. When dawn touched the treetops, the orcs roused and snarled commands. The women rose slowly, aching, yet a strange light lived in their eyes. The crone Iseldra spoke once more, her words soft but sure. "They think us powerless, but let them think it. In silence, we weave the cord. In patience, we sharpen the blade. When the moment comes, we will be ready." The women did not answer aloud, but each met the other's gaze. Each felt the bond tighten like a knot pulled firm, and so they stood, chained still, yet unbroken shadows in the firelight who would, in time, become a storm. The march stretched on for days, the path winding deeper into the wilds. The air was damp with moss and pine. Mist clung low to the ground, swallowing their steps. The orcs pressed the women onward with clubs and snarls, never allowing rest longer than a stolen breath. Yet something had changed. The women no longer walked as strangers, bound in the same chain. Their eyes sought one another. Their breaths fell into rhythm. With every whispered word, every hand that steadied another over a root or stone, their unity grew. What had begun as comfort was ripening into something sharper, something like resolve. Elira felt its strongest one dusk, when the orcs paused to drink from a stream. She looked back down the line of women, and saw them standing not in despair but in quiet defiance. Each gaze that met hers was an unspoken vow. We will endure, we will wait, we will act. That night the captives were thrown into a hollow between boulders, guarded by 2 half-lurd orcs. The women huddled together, pressed close for warmth. The lady sat at the center, her wrists rubbed raw by rope. Beside her, the handmaiden leaned close, whispering, "My lady, I think we could slip a stone into the ropes, not wedge it loose while they sleep." Others turned their heads at the suggestion. The cook, the mother with the infant, even Iseldra, the crone, each pair of eyes gleamed with hunger, not for food, but for freedom. "No," Elira whispered back. "Not yet." A murmur of disappointment rippled, but she lifted her chin, steady. "If one escapes and is caught, All will suffer. We must move as one. When we act, it must be together. Do you understand? A silence fell, heavy and binding. One by one, they nodded, and thus the pact was born, wordless, sealed not by ink or oath, but by necessity. In the days that followed, they began to test the edges of their captivity. Small things at first. The handmaiden distracted an orc by stumbling, giving the mother a moment to feed her child. The cook feigned weakness so another could slip a glance at the guard's weapons. A girl feigned tears so that her hands might brush against the rope and study its fibers. To the orcs, these were harmless acts of misery. To the women, they were rehearsals, steps in a dance not yet performed. One evening, as the fires guttered low, the lady dared more. She motioned subtly with her hand, fingers curling and uncurling. At first, the women thought it a twitch. Then they understood. She was inventing signs. A glance to the left meant guard watching. A tilt of the chin meant safe. A clenched fist against the thigh meant wait. Soon the signs passed along the line of captives like whispers without sound. The orcs never noticed. Still, defiance carried risk. One night, a young maid faltered while passing bread down the line. It tumbled, and the orc guard struck her across the face with a backhand. She fell, stunned. The lady rose halfway, fury blazing in her eyes. But before she could speak, Iseldra the crone lifted her frail body and stood before the guard. "It was I," she said, her voice rough but clear. "I dropped it. Punish me if you must." The guard blinked, surprised at the lie. His hand twitched as though to strike her down, but something in her unwavering stare unsettled him. With a grunt, he shoved her back and turned away. The women gathered quickly around her, pressing hands to her arms, her shoulders, her back. None spoke. They did not need to. Her act had said enough. Later, in the hush of darkness, Illyra whispered, "You risked much." Iseldra's smile was thin but fierce. "A chain is only strong so long as none dare to take the blow for another. Tonight, we showed them our chain is not iron, but fire." The lady closed her eyes, feeling the truth of it. Each sacrifice, each risk was fuel. Together they were weaving something, invisible yet stronger, than the bonds that held them. By the next dawn, when the orcs barked orders and the women rose to march again, a silent current ran beneath their steps. They walked as if bound by more than chains, bound by their pact, bound by the certainty that when the moment came, it would not be one woman against the world. It would be all of them. The night was thick with fog. It rolled between the trees like smoke from an unseen fire, muffling the sound of boots and the clatter of iron. The orc camp had grown careless. Drunk from their feast, most of the guards had sunk into sleep, their snores rumbling like beasts. The women lay huddled near the dying embers of a fire. Their wrists were bound, their ankles shackled by rope. But the pact burned brighter in their hearts than the flames. Illyra lifted her head, her gaze steady. She caught the eyes of her sisters, the handmaiden, the cook, the mother, the crone. A nod passed silently between them. Tonight, the first step was small. The handmaiden pressed a shard of stone, hidden in her sleeve. The fibers strained, frayed, then split. Her hands were free. She pressed the shard quickly into Illyra's palm, hiding it from sight. Illyra bent her wrists, working at the ropes until they slackened. The bindings fell away. Her pulse thundered in her ears, But she did not hesitate. She passed the shard on. One by one, the ropes fell, quiet as breath, swift as thought. Each freed woman laid her hands across her lap as if still bound, waiting for the moment. An orc stirred nearby, grunting. The women froze. An orc stirred nearby, grunting. The women froze. The crone Iseldra began to cough, loud, hacking, desperate. The orc cursed, rolling over to glare at her. She spat into the dirt and wheezed, feigning sickness. With a disgusted grunt, the guard turned away again. The shard moved on. When the last of the bonds were cut, Elira looked up at the sky. The moon had risen above the fog, pale and sharp as a blade. She raised her hand slightly, curling her fingers, the sign they had agreed upon. Wait. The forest groaned with the weight of silence. Then, when the orc's snores deepened, she gave the next signal. The women rose as one. They moved like shadows, barefoot and swift, slipping between the boulders at the camp's edge. The fog clung close, a cloak hiding them from sight. For a moment, Elira dared to believe they would pass unseen. Then a twig snapped beneath a young girl's foot. A guard sat up, blinking, then roared. Chaos erupted. Run, Elira hissed, and the women surged forward. They scattered into the trees, skirts and cloaks catching on branches. Orcs shouted, torches flaring to life. The forest lit with fire and fear. The women ran harder. Their breath came in ragged gasps, their feet cut by roots and stone, but still they ran. The sound of pursuit thundered behind them. At the edge of the clearing, a river churned. Its waters foamed white in the moonlight, swift and cold. We must cross, Elira said. But the current, the mother began. We have no choice. Without hesitation, Elira stepped into the torrent. The water clutched at her legs, cold and merciless. She pushed forward, arm outstretched to the woman behind her. One by one, they followed, clinging to each other. Forming a chain stronger than the river's pull, the current dragged, tore, tried to break them apart. Twice a woman slipped, nearly swept away, but the others hauled her back, teeth clenched, muscles straining. And then they reached the far bank, collapsing onto the mud, shivering but alive. On the far side, they gathered in the grass, their lungs burning. The orcs' torches flickered on the opposite shore, voices shouting in fury. But the current was wide, the night deep, and the women had vanished into the wild. Elira lay on her back, staring at the stars through the trees. Every bone ached, every muscle screamed, yet her lips curved into something rare, a smile. They had escaped. The handmaiden crawled to her side, gasping, "My lady, what now?" Elira's voice was hoarse but certain. "Now we survive, and when the time comes, we strike back." The women leaned close, huddled together for warmth and courage. The fog wrapped around them once more, hiding them from sight. Their bodies were bruised, their freedom fragile, but their spirits burned brighter than ever. For the first time since the fall of the keep, they were no longer captives. They were fugitives. They were sisters. They were free. The forest closed around them like a vast cathedral, its roof of branches. The women staggered through the undergrowth, their dresses torn, their feet cut and bleeding. Yet they walked with a strange kind of pride. They had crossed the river. They had fled the fire circle. For the first time in many nights, no chain dragged at their necks. When dawn broke, pale and weak through the canopy, Elira called a halt. They collapsed in a small hollow ringed by roots, their chests heaving, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. "We cannot run forever," the cook murmured, wiping blood from her leg. "We must find food, shelter." Elira nodded. "Then we will make it." Her words startled them. These women had never lived outside stone walls, never built beyond hearth and home. But Elira's voice carried conviction, and in their wariness, conviction was enough. The work began clumsily. The handmaiden gathered twigs and leaves, fumbling with flint until sparks caught. Others scoured the undergrowth for berries, roots, or mushrooms, testing each carefully as Iseldra, the crone, muttered warnings of poison. A few fashioned crude snares from rope, fibers, and branches, hoping to catch rabbits. It was slow, frustrating, humbling, yet it was theirs. When smoke rose from the first fire they had kindled without orc hands, the women sat close around it, staring into the glow. A ripple of laughter escaped one of them, brittle at first, then freer. Soon they were smiling, even through their hunger. Days bled into one another. The women learned to weave branches into shelter, to strip bark for rope, to sharpen stones into tools. Their soft hands grew calloused, their movements sure. Each woman carried a task. The cook oversaw the fire. The handmaiden learned to set snares. The mother, though often burdened with her child, taught the others songs that made labor lighter. Elira, who had once presided over feasts and councils, now learned to carry water in clay jars, to scrape hides with a sharpened stone. She was no longer a lady upon a throne. She was a sister among sisters. And in that truth, she felt something fierce bloom within her. One night, as the fire flickered low, Iseldra spoke again. "You feel it, don't you? The change. We are no longer captives. We are no longer what we were, either. We are becoming." "Becoming what?" asked the young girl who had snapped the twig. "Something new," Iseldra said, simply. "The world will name us when it learns our story." The women fell quiet, the firelight reflecting in their eyes. It was the handmaiden who gave the first name. "We are daughters," she whispered. "Not of the keep, not of men who failed us, but of ash, of ruin and of fire. And yet we live." The words settled like seeds in fertile soil. One by one, the women repeated them. "Daughters of Ash." The title passed from lips to lips, a chant, soft but strong. In that moment, the forest hollow seemed to shift. No longer a hiding place, but a cradle for something new. The bond deepened. When one stumbled, another lifted her. When one despaired, another sang. They shared hunger, hardship, laughter, and grief, until the line between lady and servant, maiden and mother, old and young, blurred away. They became sisters, and with each day their fear of the orcs dulled. They had built fire without them. They had eaten without them. They had slept beneath the stars without them. The orcs were no longer their world. They were shadows on its edges. The women's world was here, in the wilds, in each other. Still, shadows lingered. Some nights, distant horns echoed through the forest, and the women huddled close, clutching sharpened sticks. Sometimes they thought they glimpsed torchlight far off through the trees. The orcs still hunted, but the women no longer trembled as they once had. "If they come," Elira said, tightening her grip on a spear of hardened wood, "we will not run again." On the seventh night, the snares caught a hare. The cook skinned it swiftly, and the smell of roasting meat filled the hollow. The women ate in silence, savoring each bite, their eyes bright with something more than hunger. It was the taste of survival. Elira raised her portion, her voice solemn. We are not prisoners. We are not prey. We are the daughters of Ash, and no chain will ever bind us again. The women echoed her, the words carrying into the trees like a vow. And so the sisterhood of the wilds was born. In the ashes of ruin, they had forged their own fire. The forest had grown quiet, too quiet. Elira sensed it first. The stillness between the trees, the hush that even birds did not dare to break. Her hand closed around the sharpened wooden spear she had learned to carry always at her side. They are near, she whispered. The women froze in their tasks, gathering berries, weaving snares, mending hides. The air was heavy with the promise of danger. Then came the sound, the low crack of branches, the guttural murmur of voices they knew all too well. The orcs had found them. Fear surged like a tide, but Elira raised her hand. Remember who we are, she said. Not captives, not prey, daughters of Ash. The name steadied them. The cook tightened her grip on a stone knife. The handmaiden stood straighter, a sharpened branch clutched in her hands. The young girl who once faltered now raised her chin defiantly. Even the mother, with her child tied to her back, lifted a weapon of wood. The crone Iseldra's eyes glimmered with pride. Then let them come. The orcs entered the clearing like shadows given flesh, heavy with blades and torches. There were 6, perhaps 7, far fewer than the host that had taken the keep, but each one loomed with the weight of a beast. They laughed when they saw the women standing ready. Run, little birds, one snarled, raising his axe. But the women did not run. Elira gave the signal, a tilt of her chin, a lift of her hand. Now. The first strike came not from her, but from the trees above. The handmaiden, crouched on a branch with a stone clutched tight, dropped it square upon an orc's head. He roared, stumbling. At once the others surged. The cook lunged with her knife, slashing at a thigh. The young girl darted forward, striking with a sharpened stick. The mother shielded her child with one arm while jabbing fiercely with another spear. Elira moved like fire through dry grass. She drove her spear upward, catching an orc beneath the ribs. He bellowed and swung, but she slipped aside, breath ragged, eyes blazing. The clearing filled with chaos, snarls, cries, the clash of crude weapons. The women fought not with skill, but with desperation, with fury, with unity. They struck in pairs, pulling one another back from blows, swarming a single foe until he fell. One orc crashed to the ground beneath 3 of them, his blade torn from his grasp. The young girl leaped upon him, driving a rock into his skull until he lay still. Her hands shook, her eyes wide, but she did not stop until the others pulled her back. Yet the orcs were strong. One swept his club into the cook's shoulder, sending her sprawling. Another seized the mother by the hair, dragging her back with a snarl. Elira screamed and hurled her spear, striking his chest. The orc staggered, releasing the mother. She fell, clutching her child tight, tears streaming down her face, not of fear, but of rage. Iseldra, the crone, moved among them, not as a fighter, but as a spirit, crying out words that cut through the battle. Stand together. Do not yield. You are the storm. You are the fire. The women rallied to her call. Together they struck. Together they dragged the orcs down. Together they ended it. When silence returned, it was heavy and strange. The clearing was littered with bodies. The women's breaths ragged. Their arms smeared with blood, not all of it their own. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Some collapsed to their knees. Others laughed through tears. The mother kissed her child's head again and again, whispering thanks. Elira stood at the center, chest heaving, hair wild, eyes alight. She looked upon her sisters, battered, bruised, but standing, victorious. The orcs lay dead at their feet. They had faced them. They had fought, and they had won. No one spoke for a long time. Then the young girl, voice small but sure, whispered, "We did it." The words broke the silence. Laughter and sobbing mingled in the clearing. The women embraced one another, clutching arms, shoulders, faces, as if to confirm they were real, alive, unbroken. Iseldra smiled, her old eyes glistening. "This is the night the world will remember. Not the night we were taken, the night we stood." Elira lifted her head to the canopy of stars above. Her voice carried, steady as the fire burning within them all. No longer daughters of ash alone. Now daughters of flame, and flame will spread. Chapter 8. The Legend of the Women. Approximately 1,000 words. The fire burned low, crackling softly beneath the forest sky. Around it, the women sat weary, blood-stained, yet alive. The bodies of the orcs had been dragged aside, left for the carrion birds. No torch of their enemy remained. Only the steady glow of flame the women had kindled themselves. Elira sat with her back against a stone, her spear across her lap. Her body ached, every limb heavy, but her eyes were clear. Across the circle, the cook bound her shoulder. The young girl leaned against the crone, and the mother lulled her child to sleep with trembling hands. Silence stretched between them, not the silence of fear, but the kind that follows storms. At last Iseldra spoke. Her voice was rough as gravel, yet carried with surprising strength. "It must be remembered." Elira raised her gaze. "What must?" The old woman looked into the fire, its glow dancing in her eyes. "This night, our stand, our survival. The world will not remember if we do not speak. And if we do not speak, then we fought for nothing but the moment." The women stirred. The young girl sat straighter. The mother, rocking her child, nodded slowly. "So," said the cook, "we must tell it." Elira's lips parted. She thought of her family in the keep, her sisters in chains, the men who had fallen in fire and ruin. She thought of the fear she had once swallowed like poison, the despair that had nearly smothered her heart. Then she thought of tonight, of the circle of women who had risen not as victims, but as warriors. She nodded. "Then let us tell it." The women leaned close to the fire. Words began to take shape, halting at first, stumbling like a child's first steps. But together they found rhythm, a current that carried them. They spoke of the fall of the keep, of chains and fire, of despair shared in darkness. They spoke of secret whispers and plans, of courage lit like embers in ash. They spoke of the escape, of hunger and fear in the wilds, of the bonds they forged beneath the trees. And they spoke of the stand, how 7 women faced 7 orcs, how fear did not break them, how blood was shed, but not theirs alone, how they fought not with steel, but with unity, how they endured, and how they triumphed. By the time their tale was finished, The stars wheeled high above, and the moon poured its silver upon their faces. The young girl's eyes gleamed, her hands clenched as if still holding her weapon. "It is a story," she whispered. "It is more," Iseldra corrected gently. "It is a song now, a fire to pass down." Illyra's voice joined the night, low but steady. "We will not be forgotten, even if the world forgets the names of kings, the clash of armies, the rise and fall of keeps. Our daughters will sing of us, and their daughters after them." They wove the story into a chant, a lullaby for the child in his mother's arms, though its words were sharpened with steel. "We were ash and became flame. We were broken, yet we rose. We were hunted, yet we stood. We were women, and we endured." The child stirred, eyes fluttering shut to the rhythm of his mother's song. Around him, the women's voices grew stronger, carried by pride and the rawness of what they had lived. It was not polished, it was not gentle, but it was theirs. When dawn came, painting the trees with gold, the women rose. Their bodies still bore bruises, cuts, and scars. Yet something greater marked them now, the weight of legend. They were no longer nameless captives, forgotten daughters of a fallen keep. They were something new. They were the daughters of flame. Years later, in villages and towns, mothers would sing the lullaby to their children. The words changed with each telling, but the heart remained the same. That women had once stood against the orcs, that they had not fled, had not broken, had not yielded, that they had risen, that they had won. Children would drift to sleep hearing of Lady Illyra and her sisters,